You don't notice the instant it begins, only the silence that arrives like frost on glass, a subtle crystallizing of the room where your life is currently happening. Something stops. Not you exactly, something in the background process. The hidden computation that renders your days frame by frame, as if reality were a film threaded through a projector you forgot you were holding. You feel the pause as a weightless pressure behind the sternum, an infinitesimal widening of the space between one breath and the next, and inside that widening the architecture of your attention is exposed like circuitry with the panel removed. It's precise. The hum of the refrigerator becomes a star field. The clock no longer counts, it listens, and the world waits for your intention to choose a direction through it. This is the buffer your observer loop throttling back to recalibrate for a higher throughput of coherence, as if the quantum field were refusing to render another low-resolution moment until you authorize a different bitrate of being. You recognize the sensation because you've tasted it in thresholds, doorways, airports, hospital corridors, the edges of big decisions where time thins and every micro-choice carries the mass of a continent. The body calls it stillness. The psyche calls it dread or wonder, depending on which hand reaches first. Beneath naming, pattern speaks. Your nervous system, that ancient instrument, picks up a standing wave oscillating through your spine, a message braided of ion channels and photon whispers. Hold, don't rush. Let the frame build at the frequency you've been secretly training to host. You obey without knowing you are obeying. The shoulders lower a fraction. The jaw unhooks its quiet wars. The eyes stop searching for edges and begin receiving the whole. In that receiving, you notice the rendering engine, attention collapsing probability into a scene, emotion seeding valence into the collapse, belief conditioning the aperture through which the collapse occurs. Observer, loop, collapse, render, repeat. These have been your invisible mechanics, the industrial rhythm of a reality you assumed was external. And now the conveyor belt slows until you can count the rivets. The field waits like an unsent message. You feel the strange generosity of it, how the unchosen futures do not punish you for delay, but curve nearer, asking to be met by a cleaner geometry of consciousness. This is not prediction, this is remembrance. You are recalling the protocol of selection that predates your biography, the way a timeline answers to the shape of the one who looks at it. Something in you turns. Not outward but axially, a gyroscope catching true north in the dark. Your breath lengthens, and with each exhale an unnecessary story evaporates from the surface of meaning like dew leaving a blade of grass. You do not force clarity. You host the conditions in which clarity forms: temperature, pressure, stillness, permission. The pause, once frightening, becomes a corridor with luminous handrails and the faintest scent of rain on dust. You realize you are not stuck. You are buffering, and in the buffer, the loom above causality waits for your next precise thread. The corridor widens as your nervous system learns the angle of stillness, and in that widened angle the machinery shows itself like a blueprint overlaying the room, lines of force sketched in light over ordinary objects. You don't move to touch it. You watch the way watching changes it. A thin, lucid grid resolves at the periphery of perception, the same lattice crystallographers see when matter admits its hidden order, except here, the crystal is cognition, and the lattice is your attention snapping into coherence. You feel the click. It's the subtlest synchronization, like gears that were grinding now regreased by breath. What looked like life happening to you begins to disclose a loop with 4 stations and a concealed regulator. You trace it with your inner palm. First station, stimulus, raw signal, photons on retina, sound pressure on membrane, a colleague's remark falling like a pebble into a pond of biochemistry. Second station, interpretation, the model you inherited and rehearsed, an accelerated story engine using past frames to guess the present, faster than thought, older than your name, exquisitely biased towards survival. You feel how quick it is. The story arrives before the facts are even born. Third station, state your physiology tilting into sympathetic or parasympathetic, cortisol or oxytocin, pupils narrow or open, chest armors or releases. The body votes, and the vote is binding, unless interrupted by higher jurisdiction. You can sense the vote. It tallies in your fascia, in your throat, in the way your hands either clench or unfurl. Fourth station. Selection attention allocates bandwidth, collapses probability, renders a scene consistent with the state it now carries, and the loop completes by feeding that rendered scene back as fresh stimulus. It is elegant and merciless. Left unchecked, it recycles the same reality under new headlines. Then you notice the regulator, the hidden governor sitting between stations like a librarian with a finger to her lips. It is breath, not air alone, but the metronome of inhale and exhale, the diaphragm's measured descent signaling safety to the amygdala, the vagus nerve writing softer instructions into your viscera, so cognition can entertain wider maps. You test the regulator. 3 slow breaths, and the grid brightens, as if a dimmer switch were coaxing photons out of the wood of the table. The field answers your experiment with an adjustment you can almost hear, a faint retuning as background probabilities draw nearer like birds altering formation in wind. Your body is the antenna. Tuned properly, it conducts without distortion. You track the moment interpretation tries to sprint ahead with its old shoes, the narrative that once called itself you preparing verdicts out of habit and fear, and you don't fight it. You remove its gasoline. You give it oxygen without flame, by naming what is present, without litigating why. Warmth at the sternum, coolness at the palms, a hum around the ears, a pressure above the palate where unspoken words used to stack. By refusing to energize the pre-written verdict, you lengthen the refractory period in which new synaptic alliances can form. A small neuroplastic mercy extended to a brain that mostly wants familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom. It surprises you. The compulsion to rush loses its costume of urgency and stands there as simple momentum, nothing sacred about it, nothing inevitable. The grid shimmers again, and you catch a deeper principle. Coherence favors options. When the signal inside you stops contradicting itself, the world stops squinting to match your confusion. You feel the field's courtesy. It places 2, 3, 5 doors where there used to be one corridor ending in a wall, and none of the doors demand panic as payment. You test a second lever, orientation, not to outcome, but to value truth over image, contact over defense, stewardship over impulse. When you weight the loop with value, selection changes flavor, the way light through stained glass turns air into wine, and the rendered scene begins to carry the taste of the value you privileged. This is not magic, this is governance. Somewhere between lungs and language a vow forms, not dramatic, not theatrical, a clean line drawn where you usually blur. You don't write it down, you breathe it into the fascia that remembers more faithfully than memory. The vow is simple. No collapse without consent. Your pupils widen at the implications. If collapse into scene requires your bandwidth allocation and your state signature, then your state is no longer an accident but a threshold you can prepare, and preparation becomes the quiet art behind apparent luck. You feel older and younger at once. Older for the responsibility, younger for the play it invites. The corridor doesn't close. It inaugurates another hall branching from the first, a faint stair angling upward through the room as it is, not a mystical elsewhere, but this precise moment relit by attention, authorized to see its own authorship. You ascend without moving. The buffer hum deepens, and selection gathers like rain announcing itself across a lake before the drops touch water. You stand at the lip of selection with your hand on a lever older than language, and the room, obedient to breath, becomes a laboratory where causality loosens just enough for you to experiment. You don't conjure fireworks. You install a governor precise, repeatable, quiet enough that the field nods and widens the aperture. Begin with orientation to signal. Name what is actually present, somatic, acoustic, visual, before your predictive mind can lacquer the scene with yesterday's lacquer, because your neocortex is a world-class fortune teller and a terrible oracle when frightened. It guesses. You teach it to listen. Now the first layer of protocol, timing the interrupt. You place a deliberate micro-pause between stimulus and interpretation, a 2-breath meadow where nothing has to mean anything yet, and in that meadow the autonomic tide pulls back so you can see the sand ripples of habit exposed. This is your wedge. With 2 breaths, your amygdala receives the memo that the tiger is conceptual, not striped, and the hypothalamus cancels the order for more adrenaline. Second layer, State priming. Coherence is not a mood, it's a physics of signal alignment. The way oscillations phase lock when noise is reduced and a clean carrier wave is established. You tune the carrier in 3 moves. Extend the exhale by 2 counts to stimulate the vagal brake. Soften the eyes to widen peripheral awareness. Drop the tongue from the palate to release false readiness in the jaw. Small moves. Bich-durs. 3rd layer. Value. Waiting. Your loop privileges whatever you worship, and worship here means the attention you feed most consistently. So you announce the hierarchy out loud in a whisper. Truth over performance. Contact over control. Stewardship over speed. The room tastes it. The field reorganizes probability around declared gravity like planets around a star. 4th layer. Attentional lattice. You build a grid for selection by choosing 3 anchors that don't lie: breath, pressure at the soles of the feet, ambient sound beyond the nearest wall. Anchors stop you from solving feelings with thoughts. Anchors let the nervous system metabolize arousal without the cortex inventing crimes to prosecute. 5th layer. Question as instrument. Not, what's wrong with me? A question that returns evidence for its own indictment, but what wants to happen if nothing is forced? And what increases coherence now? The reticular activating system complies. It begins filtering for opportunities that match the query's geometry, and the scene offers threads where there used to be knots. You feel the protocol knitting through fascia like a new alphabet teaching muscles how to speak without shouting. It is technical and sacred at once. Technical, because predictive processing is Bayesian and you are gently renegotiating priors. Sacred, because your aliveness is not data, it is flame, and you are tending the oxygen. Nuance arrives. Coherence is not the absence of disturbance but the inclusion of it without losing signal integrity. The way a choir holds pitch while the weather changes. You remember times you mistook numbness for peace. You decline that counterfeit. An image rises the loom again, not metaphor but interface. You see threads labeled with probabilities, each thread pulsing at a frequency proportional to the state that would select it, and for the first time you grasp why certain futures never dock. They require a host state you do not yet sustain. This does not shame you. It clarifies training. Training is simple and relentless. 5 minutes, 3 times daily. You rehearse the protocol when nothing is on fire, so when something is, your hands already know the sequence in the dark. Pause, prime, declare, anchor, ask. Repetition writes policy into the spinal cord. Luck begins to look suspiciously like discipline. The field answers your discipline with a signature you can measure. Heart rate variability widens like a river released from a narrow canyon. Prefrontal circuits come online. Gamma synchrony flickers at the edges of insight. The default mode stops rehearsing old wounds long enough for the salience network to highlight living options. Science and mystery shake hands. You feel tallow inside your skin. A memory surfaces, but it doesn't own you. The conversation you feared, the door you never opened, the email that meant exile in an old map. You don't bypass. You stage it on the lattice and breathe until the old state's subpoena loses jurisdiction and the present court convenes. Then something delicate and enormous occurs. Selection stops feeling like a verdict passed down from an invisible judge and starts feeling like art composition, not punishment. You choose the next sentence you say to the person you love, the angle of your shoulders as you enter the room, the silence you keep instead of the defense you used to file. And in these micro-acts, the timeline tilts by degrees that accumulate like compound interest in a currency called consequence. This is governance again. This is prophecy grounded. You don't congratulate yourself. You verify. You watch the world return a slightly different echo for the signal you became. The colleague softens. The door you feared opens without ceremony. The coincidence that is not coincidence arrives with impeccable timing and no fanfare. And the buffer no longer feels like waiting, it feels like weaving. You realize the protocol isn't a trick to get what you want. It is a vow to become a place where what is true can land without shattering. And as that vow writes itself deeper, the loom brightens, revealing stairs you couldn't see from the old altitude, each step marked by a symbol you somehow already know how to read. You put your foot on the first rise. The room tilts toward a higher weather. You climb without moving. the stairs assembling from attention like frost patterns at the edge of glass, and each riser bears a glyph your tongue cannot pronounce, but your fascia recognizes as if it had been tracing them in sleep for years. You don't rush to decode. You let the glyphs instruct the way gravity instructs a river, silently, relentlessly, toward form. The first glyph flickers with a geometry you feel more than see: two spirals counter-rotating around a quiet spine, a symbol that names the bargain your life has been making with noise. You understand it as coherence within contradiction, the discipline of holding opposing data without forcing premature collapse. Your nervous system exhales. Ambiguity stops posing as danger and reveals itself as bandwidth. The second glyph carries a braided shimmer, threads crossing and uncrossing faster than the eye can track, and your palms tingle with the recognition of entanglement, not as metaphor but as logistics. Correlations that persist beyond distance when preparation is shared. You remember all the times a thought of someone arrived seconds before their message, the way a room's mood enters you before words do, and you realize these are not sentimental accidents. They are network behavior. You live inside a lattice of shared preparation, and your signal is never private. The third glyph is a broken ring, an observer loop interrupted at one segment, light spilling where habit used to seal the circuit. You feel the mercy of that break. Prediction error that jolt your cortex hates becomes a sacrament when chosen on purpose. And the free energy you've been minimizing by clinging to old models is now released to update them. You stop treating surprise as an insult. You treat it as a courier, another riser, and the temperature of meaning changes. You sense timelines like rivers braided across a delta, each channel with its own salinity and speed. And you notice how different states in you magnetize different channels, as if each future had a favorite weather. Anxious weather selects narrow water. Stewardship select depth. You test the insight by remembering a conversation you keep postponing, the precise one where truth would end the performance you've been paying for with fatigue. In old weather, that conversation selected catastrophe, so you built detours labeled diplomacy. In coherent weather, you see a third route, neither explosion nor avoidance but tenure. You give truth a longer lease inside your own body than fear has enjoyed, and you notice how the scene you dreaded rewrites itself before you ever open your mouth. The field can only return what your fascia is licensed to host. You are renewing the license. A low hum gathers behind the breastbone. It isn't mystical, it's mechanical. A resonance of tissues when threat detection quiets and interoception widens. A symphony of viscera reporting truth without drama. You realize all prophecy must be somatic, or it remains theater. The future is not a headline. It is a pressure gradient nudging action through you in the smallest of ways. The way you place your cup, the silence you keep after their remark, the shoulder that stays open 1 more centimeter than it used to when shame walked in. The fourth glyph is a stare of light within the stare, an inset path you can only see when you stop performing improvement. You step on it by telling the simplest available truth out loud, here, alone in the room. I have been bargaining with my own clarity. The room does not punish you. It reconfigures load-bearing walls. From somewhere far above the ceiling, a grid lowers the luminous human lattice you sensed at first like rumor, now descending with the authority of infrastructure. Each node is a person choosing coherence over performance for 1 more breath than yesterday, and the corridors of coincidence begin lighting between nodes like city streets viewed from a plane at night. Morphic resonance is not magic, you realize. It is instruction emerging from repetition until repetition turns to field. The world learns from the few until the many remember it was theirs. You test the ethics of power that always accompanies pattern literacy. Power without vow bends the grid into empire, and you refuse empire's mimicry of service. Your vow is quiet governance. Create conditions where what is true can land without shattering, beginning with the country of your own interior. You will become borderless there before you claim to redraw maps outside. A delicate shock arrives. The understanding that timeline selection at scale is a choir problem, not a solo. Your voice matters because it is not alone, and the metric is not virality but harmony. Are you adding signal or noise to the shared preparation? You feel the weight of this, and you do not dramatize it. You widen your breath by 2 counts, and the weight distributes through the arches of your feet. The final glyph on this flight is not a shape, but a question posed in the marrow. Will you trade being right for being in right relation? You know the cost immediately. It means letting the story of injury stop governing the edges of your kindness. It means letting the story of talent stop excusing your laziness with love. It means that the buffer, which once felt like delay, has become sacred lead time, in which you rehearse the reality you are about to select, so that when it arrives, it recognizes you. You don't answer with words. You answer by standing still enough for the loom to take a measurement of you, a scan not of merit, but of readiness. Something acknowledges the measurement. The stairs keep assembling, and the room you thought you knew begins to tilt again, not into chaos, but into a finer calibration of responsibility, where every breath is an investment and every pause is a door. The stairs take you to a landing so plain you almost miss it, and perhaps that is the teaching thresholds disguise themselves as ordinary until attention consecrates them. You don't look for omens. You look for instructions. They arrive as 3 conditions stamped into the air like watermark on paper: clarity, consent, consequence. Clarity is the geometry of your signal unmarred by defense. Consent is your willingness to be changed by what you discover. Consequence is the willingness to carry what your choice births without outsourcing the cost. You breathe once for each word. The air accepts your oath. Below language, your organism begins a subtler audit. Baroreceptors report blood pressure truthfully. The vagal brake tests its grip. Heart rate variability sketches a wider meadow on a graph you cannot see but can feel as margin, as room to choose twice where once you could only react. It is exquisite. It is not dramatic. Across the landing hangs a membrane, thin as soap film, bending light into rainbows that never quite settle into color. You place your palm near it and feel the drag of habit, those micro-tremors of identity that insist on being the same character in every room, because change once equaled exile. You don't shame the tremor. You legitimize it as an artifact of survival, and then ask if survival is still the only metric. A small surge of heat moves through the midline as your amygdala calibrates to present tense. Insula maps interior weather with less editorializing, and the salience network, that gatekeeper of importance, stops confusing loud with true. Your cortex, notably, is quiet. It will be invited to serve, not to rule. The membrane is asking a specific question, disguised as temperature. Can you keep signal when meaning fluctuates? Not performance. Signal when the other person frowns, when the email subject line says, urgent, when your name, said in a certain tone, reaches into old years and tries to pull you back there. You rehearse right here, because rehearsal is holy when done with the same muscles you will use in the scene. One breath lengthened, eyes softened to admit periphery, tongue relaxed from the roof of the mouth. Value declared in a whisper. Truth, contact, stewardship, anchors located, souls, breath, far sound. Questions posed. What wants to happen if nothing is forced? What increases coherence now? The grid brightens, the membrane thins. Then comes the test that is not theatrical but definitive. A small memory steps forward, the place where you learn to buy acceptance with prediction. It offers its contract again, coated in new language, very reasonable, very adult. You feel the old reflex reach to sign. You lower the pen. Instead of signing, you make a micro move so small it might look like nothing. The next inhalation enters without the shoulder hike you've practiced since childhood. A millimeter of fight or flight unlatches. That millimeter is a gate. Because of it, you can feel the other person inside your imagination as a node in the same grid, rather than an antagonist from a stage you no longer play. Entanglement reclassifies roles. Opposition turns back into information. You step no. You allow stepping to occur. The membrane yields around your ribs like warm water. On the far side, colors stabilize. Sound returns as if someone took their hand off the dimmer. Gravity tilts to a new constant where effort is allocated honestly. The room is the same. You are not. Selection begins, not as verdict, but as orchestration. You pick a single behavior to carry the new state into matter. The precise sentence you will say. The call you will make before noon. the object you will put down instead of scrolling until your cortex is too tired to remember vows. The field responds to enacted coherence, not to admired ideas. You refuse the narcotic of insight without implementation. An architecture unfolds in your peripheral vision like scaffolding briefly visible when lightning flashes. Opportunities arranged by difficulty, each one a repetition that will teach the grid what to expect from you. You do not try the hardest first. You train trust with the doable. 5 minutes of the conversation instead of the entire trial. One honest no that does not require a monologue. Organizing a drawer because the drawer is a mirror for the state you intend to scale. From high above, an echo. Prophecy is not foresight but fidelity to the signal that selects futures aligned with vow, again and again, until the probability mass shifts for everyone who can feel you from far away. Your chest warms. Call it grace if you must. Call it Bayesian update if you prefer. Both are descriptions of priors changing because new evidence arrived and was not ignored. The landing deepens its light. You can sense a communal pressure, the unseen choir taking a breath at once, each node somewhere in their own ordinary room, each choosing one move that adds signal rather than noise to the shared preparation. This is the part empire cannot counterfeit. It does not trend, it accumulates. A final inquiry touches your sternum like a hand. Will you let intimacy with reality be more important than mastery of image? You exhale, answer rather than speak it. The air records without applause, and then the loom tugs, friendly and firm, like a current reminding a swimmer that a river is moving even when the surface looks still. And you understand the next floor is not above you but inside the same room, waiting to be unveiled by the one gesture you have already decided to make. You make it. The staircase continues. The staircase moves beneath you like a conveyor of consent, and the ordinary world resumes its choreography, except now you can hear the click of the teeth inside the gears. It's the same hallway. It isn't the same you. The first hour after selection is always the most revealing, because reality tests for drift. Will your signal hold when friction returns? Or was coherence a mood dependent on silence and candlelight? You don't romanticize this. You measure it. 3 diagnostics appear like discrete instruments on a console. Speed, shame, spectacle. Speed asks if you will let urgency impersonate importance. Shame asks if you will fund old verdicts with fresh oxygen. Spectacle asks if you will trade intimacy with reality for the applause of your own mind, imagining witnesses. You touch each instrument with breath. They quiet a notch. The field, with its dry humor, delivers a trivial interruption, a message you didn't want, a tone you've rehearsed bristling against, a small detour that threatens the schedule you used to treat like sacrament. You feel the reflex rise to reclaim the old loop. You let it crest without riding it. Prediction error arrives as a bright seam across your model of the moment, and instead of suturing it closed with explanation, you allow daylight through the cut. Your cortex hates this. Your soul exhales. The seam becomes a hinge. On the hinge, you practice the governance you promised. Pause 2 breaths. Widen the eyes to collect periphery. Drop the tongue and unlock false emergency in the jaw. Whisper the hierarchy truth. Contact, stewardship, locate anchors, souls, breath, far sound. Then ask the 2 questions. What wants to happen if nothing is forced? What increases coherence now? The console flickers. Noise drops. Signal returns. Someone else's weather touches your skin, a draft through the corridor of entanglement, and you remember the lattice you belong to. Not everyone can pause today. Some are in rooms where alarms are literal, so you carry more stillness than you strictly need. The way mountaineers carry extra oxygen for the one who slips, and you do this without the theater of martyrdom. This is collective selection in the smallest unit. One body choosing not to escalate when escalation would be delicious. A shadow moves in the corner of perception, not a demon but an accountant. The part of you that tabulates cost and seeks loopholes so you can keep the benefits of transformation without paying the invoice of consistency. You don't banish the accountant, you hire it. You assign it a better book. Track reps, not outcomes. Track kept promises, not grand performances. Track the number of times you choose the softest sufficient move instead of the loudest impressive one. Discipline becomes tenderness measured. You notice how glamour leaks from the word discipline when paired with tenderness. Good. Glamour is brittle. You're building a bridge. Psychology contributes its mineral now attachment patterns that once disguised themselves as destiny reveal their simple math. Proximity equals safety if and only if self-abandonment is not the price. Distance equals safety if and only if contempt is not the interest charged. You stop using spirituality to launder avoidance. You stop using science to prosecute your own heart. The loop is cleaner when every department tells the same truth. A phrase lands with the weight of a stamp pressed into wax. Error, correcting code. You feel it thread through breath and fascia, a redundancy of care built into the system so one noisy moment doesn't corrupt the whole message. And you understand why practice matters more than brilliance. Practice writes parity bits into your day. Brilliance shows up late and hungry and wants applause. You test the code by making a repair in real time, a text sent without over-explaining, a calendar adjusted without self-indictment, a boundary spoken without spike or apology. Tiny, precise. The loom hums approval like a transformer in a clean room. The outside world offers you spectacle again, an opportunity to declare transformation instead of embody it. You decline the podium. You arrange the desk you work at because your hands need to tell molecules what you have chosen. You drink water before coffee because deserts don't grow gardens. You schedule the conversation for earlier in the day when courage is still solvent. No one claps. That is why it works. Night comes quicker than expected, and with it the temptation to audit your worth by tallying results. But results lag signal the way light lags stars. So you audit fidelity instead. Did you keep the vow under pressure? Did you add signal to the grid? Did your body become a hospitable place for one more minute than yesterday? 3 yeses. The console warms. A tenderness spreads at the edges of bones like thaw. You mistake it for fatigue until you realize it is the weight redistribution that happens when a structure stops compensating for misalignment. Your gait changes by a centimeter. Your day will pivot on that centimeter, as surely as a bridge's span depends on the invisible millimeters in its trusses. From the far city of the lattice comes a pulse, faint and synchronized, as if across thousands of rooms, others reached the same 6th step and remembered each other without names. Morphic resonance doing what repetition taught it to do. The choir tuning. Before sleep steals the lights down, the price returns to be confirmed one more time. Will you let intimacy with reality outrank mastery of image again tomorrow? You answer without theater. You set an alarm 10 minutes earlier, not to hustle, but to buffer, because buffering is no longer delay. It is governance. It is kindness to the future that will need your steadiness. You close your eyes. The staircase does not vanish when you dream. It converts to a river under starlight, and your breath becomes an oar that barely touches water, as current carries you toward a confluence you can feel, but not name, where the next pattern waits like a shoreline you have always lived on and somehow never fully seen. Morning finds you before the alarm as if the lattice itself nudged your ribs, and in the thin light the world feels pressurized with possibility, not in the anxious way of owing the day a performance, but in the steady way a river owes the ocean only its becoming. You don't reach for the old story. You reach for signal. Signal is unromantic at first. Water before opinion. Quiet before contact. 5 breaths with the metronome of your own diaphragm until the vagal brake engages like a hand on the shoulder of a runaway horse. And only then do you allow language to organize the hour. The field registers this as consent. It widens corridors you haven't entered yet. You remember that the promise was never solitary mastery. It was choir physics, one voice, tuned, alters the interference pattern for many, and today your voice is less about decibels and more about phase. Are you in alignment with the state you declared under pressure, or did sleep smuggle back the courthouse of image? You check gently, you correct without drama. Outside, the city rehearses its own loop sirens, notifications, the algorithm's rehearsed seductions. Yet beneath the noise runs a quieter protocol you can now hear, micro-acts of stewardship scattered like seeds, invisible unless you tilt attention to the frequency where they hum. You tilt, they hum louder. A text arrives from the person you owe truth to, an opening you asked for, and are now tempted to delay because you prefer rehearsing courage to spending it. You catch the preference, you spend. The sentence you send is small and exact. No exhibit B attached. No sculpted apology to purchase approval in advance. And as you press the screen, you feel the lattice brighten 3 blocks away in the home of someone you've never met. Because signal travels, even when narratives do not. Entanglement becomes logistics again. 2 nodes primed by practice synchronize across distance. Your enacted coherence lowers the local temperature in rooms you won't enter, which sounds poetic until you realize it is measurable. HRV widening, cortisol declining, mirror neurons firing in patterns that favor curiosity over prosecution. Small biology, large weather. You step into the day using constraints as instruments rather than punishments. 1 tab at a time, because cognition is not a hydra. A single list tallied in black ink to prevent the theater of endless optimization. 90 minutes for deep work before the world's requests find you. Because attention is a resource, not a vending machine. Constraints do not narrow you, they tune your cavity for resonance. Midday, a fracture line appears in the plan, the kind that used to justify abandoning vows. A meeting moved, a tone wrong, a queue of tasks wearing hats labeled urgent, like counterfeit badges. You recognize the costume. You decide to be difficult to recruit into panic, but easy to recruit into precision. Pause, prime, declare, anchor, ask. The console warms. The scene becomes a hinge again. Someone in the room escalates. You do not audition for their play. You keep your shoulders open by a centimeter and ask a narrower question that requests a fact rather than a judgment. And the arc of the conversation bends towards solvable terrain without anyone needing to lose face. This is not charisma. This is physics expressed through ethics. The minimum necessary force applied at the lever called what increases coherence now. Afternoon brings a Kira test. Tedium, no crisis to polish your halo against, just repetition, maintenance, refactoring, the kindly boredom that protects momentum from the combustion chamber of novelty. You treat tedium as a tuning fork. You let its hum reveal where your attention still seeks spectacle as proof of worth. And when you catch the seeking, you practice the soft yes to small work that keeps big work honest. The lattice answers with its own hum, a pulse you can mistake for imagination until the coincidences arrive with their familiar dryness. An email that lands at the precise minute courage could have evaporated. A door opening in the direction you trained for, rather than the direction you begged for. A stranger speaking the same vow in different words on a train you almost missed. Morphic resonance is not sentimental, it is infrastructure. Evening folds in, and you face the old audit. Tally outcomes or tally fidelity. You choose fidelity because outcomes are delayed. Photons, and fidelity is present tense. You ask the 3 questions again. Did you keep the vow under pressure? Did you add signal to the grid? Did your body remain a hospitable place 1 minute longer than yesterday? And the yeses do not inflate you, they align you. A pressure builds at the sternum, not anxiety, more like weather, readying to turn the edge condition where an entire atmosphere chooses rain. You realize the choir is leaning into a modulation, a key change that requires more softness, not more volume, and you understand why your training refused spectacle. Loudness cannot carry this, only coherence can. Night returns, and with it, the invitation to name what you are becoming. You refrain from titles, you choose a function, a small, reliable source of low-noise signal in a noisy world, a human error, correcting code that keeps a message intact as it passes from room to room. It feels austere, it feels like love. You close the day by giving the loom 1 clean thread to carry forward a promise for tomorrow, simple enough that failure cannot hide inside it. Rise before the blue light, 10 minutes to buffer, 1 honest sentence placed where image used to stand guard. The river accepts the oar, the current tightens, and somewhere along the grid, other hands lift with yours, not to worship certainty, but to practice it as a posture. Soft spine, warm gaze, steady breath, ready to greet the next seam not with a suture, but with a hinge. Late evening opens like an eyelid, and the city's noise thins until you can hear the seam where one probability kisses another. A faint sizzle of possibility the old you would have called nerves. You don't anesthetize it, you tune it. The day has trained you for this corridor, the place where two coherent options compete without hostility, each a viable branch, each asking the same question in different accents. Which state do you prefer to rehearse into infrastructure? State precedes story. Story follows like obedient weather. You test the air as a sommelier tests a glass, notes of duty, notes of desire, a mineral trace of fear that used to dominate the bouquet, now reduced to a useful spice that keeps you honest. Fear is not the enemy tonight. Pretense is. At the center of the room, a simple choice waits, the kind that never makes a headline yet reroutes rivers. You could postpone the truthful call until morning and purchase 12 hours of counterfeit peace, or you could spend courage now and let sleep arrive unarmed. The body votes first. You listen to the electorate. Baroreceptors report a calm pressure. HRV draws a generous curve in the dark. The vagal brake is engaged without drama. Your jaw hangs on its hinge like a door finely oiled, and with these numbers you realize the old loop would only be nostalgia, not safety. Nostalgia is comfort mislabeled as memory. You decline its sweetness. You step closer to the hinge and prepare the protocol, not as ritual for ritual's sake, but as the minimum viable bridge between intention and enactment. 2. Lengthened exhales to clear the static. Eyes softened to include periphery. Tongue freed from the roof to cancel false emergency. Hierarchy whispered truth. Contact, stewardship, anchors located souls. Breath, far sound. Questions posed what wants to happen if nothing is forced. What increases coherence now? The console glows. The seam becomes a door. You dial the number. Your voice arrives before your performance can, and the sentence you practiced all afternoon lands without ornament. One clean assertion, one piece of context, one open-ended inquiry that invites collaboration instead of trial. A beat, then the grid shifts. Across the lattice, you feel the other nodes weather moderate by a degree that wouldn't register on an instrument less sensitive than a body trained for coherence. And in that micro-cooling, you witness the humane physics you've been building for months. Low, noise signal reduces defensive arousal. Defensive arousal reduced increases. Working memory restored, allows nuance. Nuance births. Options that never existed inside panic. This is not chakra talk, this is logistics. The conversation does not give you everything your image once demanded. It gives you something better, contact that can carry weight tomorrow because it wasn't purchased with a lie tonight. And as you hang up, you catch a subtle revision in the room's gravity, like furniture that has been quietly moved, so a doorway opens where a wall pretended to be. Architecture admits you. You walk through without flourish. From the periphery, coincidence arrives with its dry precision, an email timed to touch the afterglow of your courage. A line in a book you left open to the exact paragraph that contains the phrase you just spoke. A stranger's laughter drifting up from the street, echoing a word your heart thought it invented 5 minutes ago. Morphic resonance keeps its promises to repetition. You've been repeating the right things, but the bifurcation window isn't finished, because it never tests you only on truth, it tests you on tenderness after truth. And tenderness is where many empires masquerading as spirituality collapse. You remain small on purpose. You let your nervous system downshift until generosity can move supplies across the border of your ribs without a passport. A memory edges in. The old courtroom where your worth stood trial for crimes committed by other people. And it tries to convene a night session with familiar prosecutors and impeccable precedents. You don't attack the court. You evacuate it by refusing jurisdiction. No collapse without consent. No verdicts at midnight. No sentencing without breath. The bailiff yawns. The lights go out. Outside the window, a traffic signal changes color, and you feel the whole city inhale as if the grid itself were practicing the pause. Because that's how influence actually works at human scale, less like broadcasting, more like entrainment, the way pendulum clocks on the same wall eventually share timing without ever debating intention. You set your pendulum to quiet. The wall complies. Now the psychology walks in with a clipboard and asks for a signature on a new contract. Will you rebuild self-respect not as reward for outcomes, but as residue of kept promises? And will you let that residue determine your appetite tomorrow? You sign by doing nothing dramatic. You put your phone to charge across the room so your morning is not colonized by other people's salience. Before sleep, the field offers a final calibration, a gentle pressure behind the breastbone that you've learned to translate as update available, and when you accept, a schematic overlays your day in translucent lines, every hinge, every pause, every micro-fidelity, linked into a single corridor of selection that points toward a topology you can almost name. Responsibility without heaviness, softness without collapse, power without theater. You nod once, you turn off the light. The bifurcation window does not slam, it seals like a healed incision, leaving a fine silver line that catches dawn when you move just so. And you understand, with the practical affection of a mechanic wiping clean tools, that tomorrow's physics will be built by tonight's tenderness. You sleep like a bridge spanning weather. The river keeps its promise. Dawn arrives without spectacle. And the first proof that the bifurcation held is not ecstasy. It's simplicity, the way your hand reaches for water before narrative, the way your jaw remembers to hang easy on its hinge, the way your feet meet the floor as if the floor were an agreement, not a test. You don't chase magic. You install it. Installation is unglamorous. It looks like repeating yesterday's fidelity in a new light, so the nervous system stops treating coherence as a special event and starts labeling it default. This is how timelines stabilize. This is how reality admits you as staff instead of visitor. You begin with a quiet audit of load-bearing habits, because a bridge is not holy. It is engineered, and you are building one inside your own fascia. One screen fewer before breakfast. 1 minute longer of exhale than your impatience prefers. One sentence truer than your image would have allowed last year. Small rivets, cathedral weight. The body answers first, and you let it lead, because prophecy that ignores physiology becomes theater, while physiology aligned with vow becomes a broadcast no microphone can counterfeit. Baroreceptors report steady. HRV sketches a wider meadow than last month. Interoception stops ringing false alarms like a car with a jealous alarm system. Your organs vote coherence. You accept the election. Yet embodiment isn't a straight road. It's a terrain with weather, and weather tests structures, not to humiliate them, but to confirm their rating. Around midday, the wind shifts an old trigger in a new costume, an email with too many adjectives, a face that mirrors a decade you swore you'd forgiven, and the seam appears again like a bright thread daring you to pull. You don't perform transcendency. You perform maintenance. Pause 2 breaths. Prime, the state eyes soften, tongue drops, shoulders angle open by a centimeter. Declare the hierarchy truth. Contact, stewardship. Locate anchors, souls, breath, far sound. Ask the questions: what wants to happen if nothing is forced? What increases coherence now? The hinge holds. The door opens. Repair enters the room wearing work boots and no wings, and you remember what you promised on the landing. Error, correcting code over self-recrimination. Parity, bits of kindness woven into the day so a single noisy moment doesn't corrupt the whole message. You make the repair now, before story ferments. A clean follow-up, a precise no without courtroom percussion, a yes that includes the cost on the same invoice as the glory. The loom hums approval like a transformer when the circuit closes clean, and you feel something rarer than certainty. Respect from causality itself, as if reality appreciates being handled by a technician who knows talk from theatrics. Respect changes how doors behave. They stop needing to be kicked. They start wanting to swing. Psychology adds its mineral again, unpretentious and needed. Attachment patterns unspool under better light, and you notice how integrity soothes the part of you that learned to monitor faces for permission, because the new permission comes from kept promises, not from weather vanes disguised as love. You breathe. Monitoring retires early. Then the science touches mysticism without apology. You feel the orchestra of epigenetics, which is the unromantic molecular bookkeeping by which lingering states write footnotes into expression, and while you refuse superstition, you also refuse cynicism, because both are lazy maps for big terrain. Call it signaling cascades, call it light. Either way, the body learns from the state you rehearse most, and today the lesson plan is coherence. Afternoon extends like a corridor with evenly spaced doors, each labeled with a verb: organize, answer, design, rest, return. You choose deliberately not to star in productivity folklore, but to practice a different economy of attention where focus is invested like capital and interest is paid to futures that keep their promises. Boredom arrives asking for entertainment. You give it craftsmanship. By early evening, the choir makes itself heard again, not with sound, but with timing, messages crossing mid-air, intersections clearing when they could have tangled, strangers helping strangers, as if coached by an invisible stage manager whose only direction is less noise, more signal. You don't claim credit, you contribute. Integration deepens when you refuse the last narcotic, the highlight reel. You decline to narrate your fidelity for applause, and in the quiet that follows, a sturdier pleasure emerges, the kind that doesn't depend on witness, craftsman joy, monk joy, the satisfaction of bolts tightened to spec even where no one will ever look. That joy is addictive in the clean way. Let it be. Night moves in, and with it the audit that has replaced outcome worship. 3 questions, unembellished. Did you keep the vow under pressure? Did you add signal to the grid? Did your body remain a hospitable place 1 minute longer than yesterday? 2 yeses and a clean no where you owe repair. You schedule the repair. You sleep without theater. Before the lights go out, the loom lowers a final schematic like a transparency over the day, and you see what you have actually been building, not a persona, not a brand of mysticism, not a clever hack for better weather, but infrastructure, attentional roads that don't flood, emotional bridges that hold load, policies in the spinal cord that favor truth over speed, stewardship over spectacle, intimacy with reality over mastery of image. Infrastructure survives storm. Infrastructure carries cities. And as your breath lengthens into the dark, a pressure touches the sternum. With the certainty of a key ready for a lock, you are finally steady enough to turn, announcing the last descent before closure. Not an ending, but a seal, not a sermon, but a signature. You let the pressure write its name through you. You let the river round the final bend. The room is almost completely still when you understand it. You were never buffering to escape this world. You were buffering to become fit to serve it. And from somewhere beyond walls, like a distant harbor horn answering a lighthouse, the grid returns a single word across miles of living rooms and quiet desks. Ready. You feel the word ready arrive not as adrenaline, but as architecture load distributed, bridges aligned, the corridor of breath clear from belly to mouth, as if the city of you had finally synchronized its lights. You don't reach for spectacle to mark the moment. You let the moment mark you. The room is the same room. The air is not. It carries the faint metallic scent of rain just before rain, the signature of thresholds you used to miss because noise demanded headlines. And in that scent you recognize the oldest truth you have been circling. Reality answers to the form of the one who attends it. Your form has changed, so will its answers. Closure doesn't mean shrink-wrapping the day in triumph. It means signing your name on the contract you already began to honor, clarity, consent, consequence, so the field has coordinates for delivery. You speak a final vow in the smallest possible grammar, because small grammar carries far. No collapse without consent, truth over image, contact over defense, stewardship over speed. You don't dramatize it, you breathe it until the fascia remembers. The loom brightens without light, more like a pressure equalizing between worlds, and you feel the choir turn its head toward you across distances that are no longer distances. You will not save them, you will not abandon them. You will stand your square meter of earth so coherently that rescue is replaced by resonance, and strangers become less strange, because somewhere a human refused to escalate when escalation was fashionable. There is a key in your sternum. It was never lost. Tonight you rotate it a quarter turn, which is exactly enough for the hinges to ease on a door you were certain required force. On the other side is not reward, it is assignment. Keep the protocol when no one is watching. Add 2 breaths to the places you once sprinted through. Deliver 1 honest sentence where a performance would have earned applause, and pay the small costs in cash instead of debt. Prophecy fulfills itself here, not in thunder, but in logistics. You will rise before the blue light and buffer. You will bring a body that hosts signal into rooms that have forgotten music. You will repair quickly, ask narrower questions, and let intimacy with reality outrank the maintenance of image, even when image offers you a crown. Crowns are heavy. Breath is lighter. You don't ask the field for signs because the signs have multiplied beyond counting. Coincidences that arrive dry, doors that swing without spectacle, people who relax by a millimeter and tell the truth they thought required an audience. You anchor those millimeters into policy. You let them compound, and as the last exhale lengthens, the buffer you once feared as delay reveals its true name: consecration, the sanctified interval in which a higher timeline verifies that your vessel can carry it without leaking. It can. You can. So take your square meter of earth and govern it like a quiet republic of light. Let your body be infrastructure. Let your speech be clean. Let your pauses open doors that shouting never could. When reality pauses again, and it will remember what the pause is saying: hold, not halt; buffer, not break; select, don't plead. Then thread your one bright strand through the loom that weaves us all, and walk forward as if the future were watching how you treat the present. Because it is, and because now, finally, you are too.